Welcome to the Lovecraft Country Discussion Group podcast. This is our third installation, and this is episode 6. We are joined by our illustrious hosts, Taylor Made, Omira, China, Iyeli, and Pamela Wood.
Yay! Okay, so we're going to do something a little different this week because I know that you all love these lengthy breakdowns, giving you everything you need, but we are going to just do the major talking points this week. We have pulled some major themes from episode 6, and we are going to throw those at you. Let's start with, let's see, what's a major theme? I'm going to try to save some of the nice juicy ones. Why don't we just start with parents? Let's start with the theme of parents, parenting, and expectation.
And protection.
And lack thereof.
Right, protection. Well, so, I think this, yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was going to say go Yelly.
Well, this episode had a lot of parallels to previous episodes. We had yet another parent who was kind of driven by her own agenda, and that is Gia's mother. We had kind of a different look at Tick and his discussion of his father and his father's kind of twisted parenting and his father's idea that he was protecting his son by beating him into some sort of, some person he imagined him to be or he wanted him to be. There was even this discussion from Gia's best friend who kind of talked about how, parents shape their children through their fear and to kind of resist that. And that became kind of one of Gia's beliefs and one of her mantras, despite the situation she was in. Yeah.
And there's this theme of mothers endangering their children. We've seen this with Letty and Ruby's mother. We're seeing this with Gia and her mother. What's going on with this theme?
Actually, it seems to be like an East-West connection. Like we saw Letty and Ruby's mother as this woman who kind of ran off chasing men or whatever passions she was chasing and left her daughters behind. And, this is not simply kind of this Western problem, this thing that only happens in America. This is something that we see in other societies that are kind of ruled by, in which women are kind of raised to believe that like the goal of life is to have a man and to belong to someone. This mother has to have a husband. It's shameful, literally shameful to her life. It closes off her social world to not have a husband. So, she's literally taken advantage of. This man handpicks her to be his wife, and because she's got this daughter that he can then take advantage of and rape. And so, the quest for having a husband or being attached to some man has led her to offer her daughter up to a rapist, essentially. So there's neglect on one side, and then there's this completely predatory situation over here in Korea with the moms.
I was going to say the aspect of fear. So a lot of times as parents, we thrive off the fear of this concept of making our children better than us. And with her mother, she, first of all, is a very patriarchal society where the function is the man has the control, and in order for you to have control or be able to be reiterizing the classism aspect of what was happening, where we have it here now, you have to be associated with a man. So you can tell in some capacity how they live. They come from influence. They had some form of financial power and things they're able to access, and even the outlook of how their place is. You can tell that the platform that the man brought. You can also see in that where you do a comparison with what's happening with Tig in Montrose and what's happening with Gia and her mom. And this we're going to touch on this more, but this concept of human, right? The establishment of monsters and humans. And you see it where as parents, we're often, I'm a parent, and you're often internalized as being like the know of being in know of everything. Like you're expected to just know everything. You're expected to kind of just, you know, we're not as humanized as we would like to be, especially when you deal with your children. So a lot of the times, regardless of the things they're going through, at the end of the day, it's always going to pinpoint back to you because it was something where as though they felt as though you should have protected them from, or you could have put a barrier from. So in reality, when you look at those situations, I think a question that would come up for me is, when do we accept responsibility for our lives and not say that we don't acknowledge what we went through, but acknowledge that this is trauma that we went through, and how do we overcome that? Because it gets to a certain point when you're older where it's just like, you can't keep blaming your life choices or things that you experience due to your past. And, you know, you have to make a choice or a decision to say, I'm going to take ownership, not negate the fact that it happened, but more so like, what can I do to overcome this? So that's something that's a theme that I noticed.
So continuing on this theme of humanization, we've called into question the idea of Gia questioning what it is to be human, and does she even want that? She's seen these lives through 99 men whose lives she's taken, and she's seen so many horrors. She's seen the results of war. She's seen her friend be dragged off and other girls that she knew very well be shot down in front of her. And so this idea of what it is to be human is an interesting theme in this, because it's starting to sort of parallel with what Ruby was questioning in the previous episode with, you know, what am I trying to achieve? What is my end goal here? What do I need in order to sort of reach my own self-actualization? I think I need to be white. That's the ultimate currency. And then she realizes that's not all that I thought that was going to be. In the same way that Gia is starting to realize that maybe being human, maybe I don't want to go back to that. And she like delays her culminating man exploding thing. I don't know what we're calling. She delays her ceremony because she's having doubts on returning to this human concept.
I think just like Ruby discovers, you know what, this whole being white is not what it's cracked up to be. Jiha, as a demon, realizes this whole thing about the end goal of becoming human, not exactly what it's cracked up to be. She's seen, as you said, too many things that tell her being human is not going to be the best thing for her. What stops her from going through to number 100 is a kind of feeling of what love is. So she's been operating through fear since she came into this realm, right? All of a sudden, it clicks to her what love is. And having realized that, then maybe I don't necessarily need to go through this ceremony because he loves me as I am. And then we get to the whole part about, well, who are you really if you are uninterrupted? So there's this layer from the last episode that comes into this episode about who are you really uninterrupted. Gia's trying to find that out. Her best friend is trying to find that out and convince her, you know what, this whole parental thing that they've got over you, it's not what it's cracked up to be. You can be who you want to be. And I think that's a whole new concept when it's introduced to her. She's still trying to figure out who she is based on movies, as a lot of people have done in foreign countries. American movies are sent to their theaters, they sit and watch, and they believe what they see on the screen. That this whole idea of romance and love and it will come to you in some kind of fantastic, fantasy, is something that she believes she should be aiming for. She emulates the people in her class, the girl who wears the best socks, the best Bobby socks. It's 1950, whatever. So I'm assuming it's Bobby socks. Roll them down, that your ankles are cuter, you know? These little things, she's trying to catch the nuances of being a human, but then she realizes this is a waste of time. These metamorphoses that she's going through and killing and coming out and all this blood, it's not worth it.
And this Kumiho spirit was summoned as a result of fear and revenge. So that she's literally a product of that. And she's fighting that with her own sort of reinvention of what love should be.
Right.
Because that wasn't it.
Well, they say there are only two emotions in life, fear and love, right? Are you either you're operating out of fear or you're operating out of love? She's beginning to be swayed towards love and not this constant fear that Uma, you know, reminds her every night when she comes home. Who wants to hear, I got to kill another man every time I come home? There's Uma. Reminded me of my obligation as a demon. And if I want to be like you, you know, really, Uma is not a great example of a human. Why would I want to emulate Uma? You know, so yeah, we've got to examine that whole fear versus love.
I think
You know, that
it's also
reminded me-
interesting. Go ahead.
It just reminded me of something I heard from a priestess of Oshun. Oshun is a Yoruba deity, an Orisha, and she says fear and love cannot share the same bed. So I just thought that was really interesting because of the whole bed being kind of like the central fixture in the show, where she's almost like a slave to her mother's fear and this desire for revenge, but like ultimately who she is uninterrupted is someone who, an entity, a being who wants love and wants to be loved, but that's the struggle because they can't coexist. You know, there's a war going on internally with that.
Absolutely.
Hmm. I think it's interesting how Gia experiences actually a lot of human emotions. And she, you know, there's this question throughout the episode of, is this love? What is love? What's this type of love versus this type of love? And just defining that for herself. But also, I found it interesting how, you know, when they're at the meeting and they're doing the speed dating, there's this voice overlay that says, you know, hit by a bolt of lightning. I just want to know what it's like to be hit by that bolt. And then later in the episode, when she's talking to Tick and she confronts him, you know, on the base, she says, there was a surge of lightning that shot through my body when I saw you. And it was complete anger, so much so that she had to remove herself from, like, she just stopped in her tracks. And you can see how much she's shaking. And so I think she doesn't even realize that these are human emotions too, that she's experiencing throughout the entire episode. So it's really just defining for her what this journey looks like and how she's going to go about it.
You know what? In the opening with the trolley song, there's a line, zing, 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 wet my heartstrings. When from the moment I saw you, I fell. And that's exactly what she expressed, what you said, China. You know, it
Right.
relates to what she knows from the screen and how to fall in love and how to be loved.
Mm-hmm.
Tick represents that character in the movie that she knows, in all the movies that she's sitting there, you know, entranced every night in the theater, trying to understand how she can get this love. So yeah, that's perfect. It reminded me of that.
It made me think of the
Yeah.
Wizard of Oz too, like the Tin Man wants a heart all along, but he's been showing love the whole journey.
Right.
And he doesn't figure out, oh, I've been loving and I've been kind of using my heart this whole time, and the Wiz has to kind of like, he has to figure it out at the end. And I feel like it's that, the zings and the lightning, and yeah, absolutely. I feel like she's our Tin Man.
I'm just gonna say that you see her. So initially, it's, to me, in my interpretation, that it wasn't love; it was revenge. She wanted revenge for her friend. So then gradually it grows into love because of the experiences that he brings to her. And you also see them kind of like play in that importance of George and the role that he played for Tick. So Tick, in my opinion, learned how to be more of a man from George. So he was able to like set up that date, and it was very unique. And, you know, he was able to kind of like win her over. But initially she wanted to kill him because he had killed her friend. And that's why she runs out of the hospital, and she's so enraged in regards to like, if she had a chance, I think she would have killed them then and there. And then she starts to develop, because of pity and because the savior aspect, she starts to develop feelings for him because she starts to understand that he's a human, and then he's vulnerable right now. So he can't see, he needs you to read the book, he can't walk right. He's looking for validation, which is why he's trying to help you do everything. You see that come into play in regards to her. So I think she really starts to like shift in regards to her feelings for Tick, and understanding, she starts to see those characters in Tick as she gets to know him.
So let's discuss then, following that train, the connection between violence and intimacy in both this episode and kind of as a trend that we've seen going. Because it seems that violence is easier for pretty much everybody. I mean, in one way or another. It's just either through it being a learned behavior or acting as a shield for actual emotions, but violence seems to be the easier thing.
I would say it's the aspect of the humans versus monsters. And the difference is, the things that separate monsters from humans is the aspect, the connection emotionally. So we're seeing that reflect all throughout the series. And it makes you kind of like internalize things like, am I defined as a monster because of what I went through and what I've experienced, or can I change that because I choose to address the emotions I went through? So that's a big piece. So you see that with the aspect of when you think about sex and intimacy, it's all emotion. That's established through emotion. And when you're killing, you can be ruthless. Like, like I think China said it, he basically following orders. His response to her when she said, "You killed my friends," he was like, "I was just following orders." And when you look at it, like, especially as a Black man in the army, and even the I think there was a general, he was following the command. And it's kind of like, you just have to fall in. You lose your voice in a way, like, even if it's unjust. Like, thinking back now, the Tick that we're dealing with now, he wouldn't have been able to do that. But that Tick is a completely different person. So it also talks about circumstances and how it impacts and changes as we develop as people. But I definitely think the emotional piece of intimacy, it ties in with emotion, which is why they can't connect.
And
They don't.
So we're seeing the emotion projected in the eyes. The eyes seem to be the theme.
Yep. I thought it was so striking that we have seen Tick torture someone. We saw him shoot someone with no hesitation, but he hesitates before he has sex for the first time. You know, we've seen people hesitate to kiss each other in previous episodes. We have seen Letty, obviously, you know, it's been implied that Letty is involved with activism to some degree. She's bailing folks out of jail, etc., but had never had sex either. Like, there's this kind of this barrier there, you know, the sex that's happening is kind of delayed. The intimacy is delayed. But then inappropriate sex is kind of like having, like, children are being raped, and, you know, there's all kinds of other kind of weird juxtapositions around intimacy, and then this violence that's so much easier. And I think there is a connection through the eyes being the window to the soul. I think people are really, when you're asking questions about who are you, when you're asking questions about, like, uninterruptedness of it all, right? You really are asking soul questions. You're really asking about soul deep questions. And I think one of the things that we noticed with Ruby is her, when she was making her transformation into the white woman, the previous episode, the first thing you can notice is her eye color changing. That's where the change began. And I think this episode, you actually see the Kumail when Gia is changing into full fox spirit Kumail, like, before the tails come out, you actually see, like, this glowing kind of swirly thing happening in her eyes. But then the contrast to that, you got Tick, who can't see half the time. He's struggling with vision, right? So there's almost like You know what? It's all because the Kumiho takes men's souls and did not take Tick's souls. It leads one to question, like, is there some sort of disruption with his soul? Like, is something missing? Why we can't see into his soul? We can't see the changes happening within his soul the way we can see with other characters. Because there's some blindnesses, and we started talking about that. But Pamela had a lot of good thoughts about the type of blindnesses we see with Tick and his eye problems. Tick had eye problems.
We discovered a term, inattentional blindness. Yes. So Tick has already met Jiha, met her on her knees with a gun to her head, but cannot remember her in the hospital. He also suffers from, so that's inattentional blindness. He also suffers from blindness with his glasses. They're broken. He's destroyed that he cannot get back on the normal train, which soothes his soul, which is to read the books of his father, right? And this has caused him, hurt beyond belief. And so the blindness that he suffers also causes a problem in the end, because he doesn't recognize this young lady who can hide in front of him. This is the crazy part. She's hiding right in front of you, plotting against you, much like her best friend was a spy. She was hiding in plain view, right? We have that theme coming up again. But everybody has two faces. We keep talking about duality. Everybody is one thing to one person and another thing when the time is right to another person. To either get to their means, which is like with Tick, it is just be a stone cold killer, right? When the time calls. Those are my orders. Or it's to be a virgin and please, don't hurt me. It's
vulnerable.
Crazy. The juxtaposition of all this, the brutality on one side of who you are as the monster, and then the innocence and the love that you have and potentiality that you have to be in your fullest humanity. Mm-hmm. They keep battling, there's not a balance. And that's why all of these characters are like struggling like crazy. So, yeah.
So now, correct me if I'm wrong, but it just occurred to me that every time Gia was with these men and she would suction onto their eyes and see these visions, it seemed like she was seeing their lives, like their past. But for some reason, it seemed like she was seeing Tick's future. So what is that? Like, what? He was the only one that had a future out of all these men, because these other men were killed right then. There was nothing to see past that. So she could only see their past.
Yeah, I thought that's what it was. Like, she was about to take their future. She took it, She was letting Tick have one.
Yeah. I thought she got a glimpse between the future and the past.
Yeah, she saw all of it.
She saw
She saw a little bit of everything. I think the thing that distracts her with Tick is because she had developed feelings for him. She saw everything. She saw him being beat up and beat by Montrose. She saw him in the bed with another woman. She saw Letty. She sees Letty in the visions, and she sees him kind of like being restrained and just being defeated. And I think with her, which is why she goes to the shaman for like further explanation, and the lady's looking at her like, that, stop. You are not a human. Issues. You are a demon, and you need to stop worrying about him, because if you saw that he's gonna die, he's gonna die. And I think it was like she had to pause, because it was like she really does care for Tick. But then I see it as, you see it as this combative magic. I think because Tick is who he is, she couldn't kill him, because she may have seen that he has a different purpose. Like the other guys, they were just, their intent, like even they were very rough with her. Tick gave her that sense of vulnerability. It was just a different experience. So I think, she kind of like says Tick because she cares for him, and keep in mind, he really loved her at one point, because he said, why don't you come with me? And she's like, I can't, so she experiences what she sees in the movies, and that's why she's like, is this love, and this is love, and this is what love looks like. So she's fearful for Tick, because she doesn't understand. She can't definitely like project his future. Because even it reminds me, like even with tarot, like just because it's shown to you that way doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to end that way. We all have free will, and we all kind of like can change that fate.
Right.
Oh.
I think we're talking about love and magic, and how love can turn as a spell. You know, there are love spells. Love can turn a spell that's supposed to go one way, another way. And I think combining with who Tick is as a magical being, not knowing he's, you know, magical, like hell, all Black people are magical. But do we use and assert that fact or that truth? On occasion, some of us do, some of us more than others. And I think her blood recognizes that.
Is this tying in the blood sex magic?
Absolutely. You know, I'm going to tie in what I
Come on with.
I'm preaching here.
Thank you. Okay. So we have blood sex magic and this idea of the virgin popping up again. And I want to connect blood sex magic, the virgin, and the idea of Eve all together.
Ooh.
Like let's cook that bun and produce that. Because I feel like all three of those are part of the same pastry.
Who wants to tackle that?
Well, I like on a basic level, I do like how the show tackles this hypersexualization, not just of Black women, but also Black men. Like Tick and Letty, we see that they are fully grown adults who are virgins, who have done other things with their lives other than have sex. And with each of them, at the moment that they lose their virginity, there's this surprise, this moment of like, oh, what? You know what I mean? Like when Tick finds out later that Letty was a virgin, he's like, you know what I mean? It almost doesn't register at first. Again, we come back to him and his blindnesses. He's got a lot of blind spots when it comes to Letty, right? But then the same thing happens to him when he's in the bedroom with Gia. She's like, you've never done this before, you know? And so I think, you know, as I was saying in our chat before, you know, virgin status is considered, you know, a really important spiritual commodity in some traditions, not all, in some traditions. And so, you know, that in and of itself seemed like a spell. Like when Gia found out that this man was a virgin, she didn't, you know, go full throttle with the, you know, the blood shower, you know, it gave her pause. Perhaps that was the thing that turned the whole situation around. Like she was able to finally kind of stop going back and forth on her decision about whether to kill him, and essentially like turned him away, like kicked him out of the room, just violently kind of ripping herself apart from him so she didn't kill him, because like in the virgin status was his innocence, his purity, his lack of experience, even though she knows he's a murderer, a torturer. It kind of nullified or neutralized that in some kind of way. So I think that was really important. Also, and I just thought about this, the candles around the room, I'm wondering if we could count those, like if there are 99 candles, because she lit one and all of them came on, all of them were lit. So like, are these the souls like of all of these other people in the room? So does the presence of love plus sex kind of counteract all that sex, blood, magic, ritual killing she has been doing in that room up until that point? Like, did it just change the air and the atmosphere? You see what I'm saying? There's so much that I think is possible.
A virgin's blood can change what's going on in that room.
Right. That was a thought.
Mind blown.
China, Eve.
Well, Eve keeps coming up, and she's first presented to us as, you know, the one who ruined everything. And so it's funny how they have this talk, Gia and Tick, about the Count of Monte Cristo. The book comes up again. And it's clear that Gia's seen the movie, Tick's read the book. And so this is like their first kind of conversation. And so I found it interesting how Gia's main thing was this story is told poorly. You know, it's like, and then this concept of choice comes up as well. You know, what would Edmund in the book have done with his life if finally given a choice? And that was something that was taken from him. And so then, of course, it doesn't make sense, you know, for Mercedes in the book as well to rob Edmund of his most interesting turn, she says. And yet Edmund still rekindles that relationship, and now everything's all happy again. And so Mercedes, in a way, is the Eve that ruined everything. Then you have Tick. How can I say this? Tick being a virgin as well. It kind of all is connected for me. Like that talk about Mercedes robbing Edmund is a foreshadow of, you know, Eve. And I don't know. I thought it was interesting. I'm still working that one out. I'm still definitely working it out.
So, okay, so to explore this Eve theme, and I'm just gonna go out on a limb here. The idea of Eve is that she's from Adam's rib. So she is birthed in a violent way. She is extracted from him. So here we have Gia. If Gia could represent, or the Kamiho, or somebody represent this idea of Eve ruining everything. She's birthed from chaos, and she's birthed from, I don't know. I feel like there's something in that. There's something in that, because we keep getting this idea of the virgin. We keep getting this idea of the somewhat not helpless, but men that are unaware that they are in danger as a result of interacting with a woman. Because this fall came as a result of Eve eating the fruit, and now Adam is affected as a result of that as well. But he was unaware of that was what was going to happen and what was going on, and it was her fault. And that is kind of, you know what I mean? Like there's something in that.
More blindness on Tick's part.
Mm-hmm.
Not being able to recognize what she could potentially do is causing him harm.
Mm-hmm.
Despite the fact that they do sleep together. And she says to him, I won't hurt you, which is completely flip of what we would normally hear in this situation, you know? She basically promised, I will not hurt you. And it's usually the man who would say to someone who's a virgin, to a woman who's a virgin, I won't hurt you. But he's still blind.
I think they're subverting all of that. Like, what if the male, a man is the virgin, and what if this isn't even the origin story? What if this is like the Christ story? What if this is like the nativity? This is like a virgin having sex and then giving birth to a savior. Like the idea of saving comes up so many times. Like we literally, in her vision, in Gia's vision, we see Tick being kind of sacrificial in some way. He's going to die and save everybody else. That's what's being implied here. They saved each other. Gia and Tick saved each other right after seeing each other as monsters and then seeing each other as not monsters. Like that, there was a salvation in that. So I feel like there may be another biblical story maybe in here surrounding the virginal sex. Although I think we need to see more before we can fully unpack that one.
I would say in the aspect of the virginal sex, you see Gia thought as Eve in regards to being able to destroy men. But she doesn't go after women. Her sole focus has been men. So she's able to take their souls and can, you know, take over their lives. And since she's destroying the essence of the man in the future that they may have carried. And some of these men, it looks like they were men of distinction and power. So we don't know what they would have been able to done throughout the world had they been able to live, if they weren't killed by Gia.
So just to circle back to what Yeli just said about the idea of tick and Jesus and that connection. Jesus, another name for him, because he has many names in biblical text, but one of his names is the last Adam.
Mm.
So I think I said it's in the oven. I can't get it out. It's
Right,
just
right.
in there perpetually cooking. But this idea of these atoms and Jesus and tick and his ring that said die, and I think there is probably something in there.
And also, let's not forget, like, this episode is about recentering ourselves in not just the Christian worldview. Like, we've definitely got a Korean spiritual cosmology at work here that is actually depicted as more real than the Christian mythology that we're used to, that we're usually grounded in, right? Like, when they talk about the Judy Garland movie and the speed dating, for instance, Gia's talking about Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. She loves that song, but it's like a part of a fantasy world of, obviously, as the Koreans are being kind of recolonized by the Americans after the Japanese have already done a number on them. Like, they're bringing these kind of pro-capitalist, anti-communist, imperialist ideas, but along with that is the Christianity, the American Christianity that comes with it. So with these films, like, they're getting kind of a healthy dose of that. But what's real in their lives is a fox spirit with 9 tails. What is real on our screen as we're looking, the real shaman, right? Like, these are actually like characters and entities at work in the story. Meanwhile, kind of like the Christian stuff is abstract in this episode. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, it's nebulous. And so I thought that was really, really interesting to subvert that worldview in the service of an Asian worldview. So I kind of like, we should also still recenter like what our understanding of this. I wish I had more time to do more research on that side, to find out really more the significance of the Kumiho. Like, I know that the Kumiho spirit is as you were saying, and I think Omira pointed out, like, focused on men, only exacts revenge on men for violating women, right? But even if you think about, I guess this is moving the center back to a Western view, but like the word vixen, when we use the word vixen to describe women, it's a fox, it's a female fox. It's, but it's also a woman who is shameless and sexually dominant and problematic. And so again, I feel like the show in some ways is trying to tie the East to the West and say, like, sexism and patriarchy exists in the Eastern cultures and in the Western cultures, and it's problematic no matter where we find it. Women in Eastern cultures are experiencing this, as well as women in Western cultures are experiencing this, to the degree that even in these Eastern cultures, even in Korean culture, you have an avenger spirit. Like, I didn't see the Kumiho as a demon. I saw it as an avenger of women. So yeah, anyway.
I called her in one of my statuses, the Korean Siren. So
Yes.
every episode has a siren, right?
Yep.
So she represents the siren to me in this episode, plying her wares with men who fall victim to whatever she's, selling. And she lures them in, much like a siren would. And they meet their doom. They don't meet them on the rocks, but they meet them right there in the bed, right?
Yep.
So I think, again, we hear this whole siren thing repeating, and how men are vulnerable to the beauty and to the songs of women. And so why it keeps coming up, and I'm hoping eventually it will all tie in towards the end, but without women being vilified,
So I'm gonna reach back to the previous episode and connect in this theme, because there were a lot of these parallels. So if we're talking about the fact that the Kumiho only exacts its revenge on men, we saw this happen with Ruby and the manager, right? So that was enacting some revenge on a man that was gonna be very problematic.
Mm-hmm.
Another sort of parallel theme we saw was with the metamorphosis, right? So Ruby's metamorphosis and Gia's as well.
Yep. And they literally have the butterfly connection between the two,
The
right? Like Gia's dresser, when she's looking in the mirror, there's like flowers on the dresser, and she's like happy and grooming herself. Like there's a butterfly on the front of that. And then the song that she remembered, like the memory she took from the rapist stepdad, like the song that Gia sang as a child when she was being abused was a song about two butterflies, a white butterfly and a yellow butterfly, which I thought was like, again, like a direct reference back to Ruby, as you were saying, like in the metamorphoses of these two women, I guess. Can you call them both women? Yeah.
Okay. Let's switch gears because I can't figure out how to connect this, but I just thought that this was a very interesting, tidbit was the idea of the Black communist and the zoot suit. Please explain this again, because I like the connection to the war with that, because I couldn't put together why they were showing us these images.
Yeah, so the Korean War is a close follow-up to World War II, but the Korean War really is where the United States enters into the Cold War in earnest. There is this Red Scare that this government is hotly engaged in, and it is about stamping out communism wherever it might rear its ugly head in the world. And I'm saying that, sarcastically, but, like it is an extreme and very militaristic and deeply social attack against any potential communism in service of American capitalism. And when the characters are in the movie theater, for a brief second, they're watching this propaganda cartoon where you see like this kind of swarthy, dark-haired cartoon character, and he's got a zoot suit on, and then you see kind of like a crowd of other cartoon characters, and they're going to attack him. Well, that character, I've actually shown that cartoon in classes of mine where we're talking about the Cold War. It's a propaganda film, and the title of that little cartoon is called Make Mine Freedom, because it's all, I think, the communist character in the zoot suit is like selling a communism like as a bottled drink. And then the other people are kind of like, they got their pitchforks and they're going to fight him for trying to sell them these false dreams of freedom that are really slavery, because communism is supposed to be slavery. So this is a cartoon that you would watch. And I think that one came out in 1948, before the real feature film comes on. So these propaganda films, this was one that was shown all over the United States, but I guess apparently they're showing it with Korean dubbed over it. And I was telling you guys earlier in the chat, like in the 30s, you have the brothers, the African-American brothers, who are wearing these zoot suits. But when the war hits, it becomes almost blasphemous and totally anti-American to have all this extra fabric on your wear clothing with excessive fabric. It's this austerity times. We're trying to make sure that all of our resources go toward the war effort. So fabric needs to go toward parachutes and uniforms for our soldiers out there. And so it was a form of resistance in many ways through fashion. Some of the brothers were just like, I'm not fighting for this country. This country hates me. And we've heard that being spoken by the Black men in this film, in this show a couple of times. And then you see, flash forward to like 1943, when we're in the midst of World War II, the Mexicans out west start wearing zoot suits. And they literally have the zoot suit riots out there where the cops are arresting them. There's fights with American soldiers between them and the Mexicans in the zoot suits. There's this whole fashion movement that comes out of that. And so, of course, when we get to this cartoon, the kind of white American powers that be are still mad about these zoot suits. So the bad guy, the communist guy, the darker complexion character in the cartoon is wearing a zoot suit. So all of that. So they're now exporting these beliefs to Korea, right? Imposing these beliefs in Korea. And obviously we see how that plays out when you see the communists being hanged and Gia's best friend being tortured and killed and all that other stuff. So yeah, it's not just fashion, it's deep.
That's deep. I think the last major theme, and there's a lot sort of attached to this, was the idea of the sexualization of women and violence. And in this, we're dealing with the idea of Tick's relationship to Letty versus Tick's relationship to Gia. That has been the biggest debate in the group right now. The group is on literal fire right now, and so we have to address this. We understand that Tick's relationship with Gia precedes that with Letty, but there is like some contention about how Tick regards Gia, who she actually is, how he sees her, how he thinks Letty is, and how she actually is, and the difference in how he regards the two. And I'm gonna kick this whole thing off with the fact that I just realized that Tick like begged Gia to come with him. This is the only time we see Tick ask a woman to come with him anywhere, because he's always leaving Letty. And Letty stays seeing his bag packed and stays going like, you were gonna leave. Twice, I think we've seen this happen. So this is the last can. Let's just open this can of worms, because I think we have to take into account the fact that very few men have had an ex suck their soul out of their eye sockets and throw them across the room with a tail. And I feel like when you have something like that happen, you're not likely to open up that easy. And, you know, like I feel like we're not taking that much into account either. Like, what do we think about this whole situation with him and Letty and Gia?
So I saw the comparison, and my thinking was they're dealing with two different versions of Tick. So the first version with Gia, you see him, he's a virgin, he doesn't know what he's doing, he has that sense of vulnerability, right? So then he comes back and he's dealing with Letty, and again, we gotta highlight that he definitely begged Gia to come with him. Because that's his first love, right? You know, usually when someone takes your virginity, usually develop that first love, that puppy love for them. And you see him transfer with Letty, and mind you, this is like 5 or 4 years later. He's a completely different person. He's been through a war. He's been through abuse from his father. He's been through his losing his mother. He didn't have the essence of how to treat a woman in a way. He developed that from Uncle George, but then when he's interacting with Letty, he loses Uncle George. So everything that set these boundaries and standards for him is gone. Another thing is the culture aspect of Korea compared to what's in Chicago is very different. So in Korea, their culture sets that standard for women. And with our culture, we kind of don't. You know, I don't even know why it bothered me that Tick really cares so much to think with what you had to say was important, you know, and then we go into that vision thing that Pam was mentioning, like, if he would have been paying attention, he would have been able to know that one, she was uncomfortable, two, this was something blood, like even when you have your menstrual, for the way she bled, like he didn't want to see it. He didn't want to see it. And then Letty puts on this role where she just can take it. And you see her in a sense where she's not even advocating for herself to say, yeah, you're like, you going too hard right now. You know, even in the last scene we have, you see her take the time out. I think it's towards the end. This is when they were dealing with Ruby, last week's episode. You see her show him, this is how I want you to treat my body. And that's when they're on the couch. But initially when they were on the car, he was rough. He was tossing her around and just, you know, really rough. And I just remember like she really took the time to show him like, no, let me take the lead and this is what I'm going to show you so that you know how I want my body to be taken care of. And then you see him kind of get that vulnerability established with Letty. So it's, to me, it's all about that standard and that boundaries piece in a way, because we go off of assumption. So the comparison is two different people. It's two different versions of Tick. The cultural aspect is different. Tick is more vulnerable in that situation. He's a virgin. He's in a country he has no idea of their culture or, you know, what's imperative there. He's on thin ice there, so he doesn't know. So that's one piece to consider. And then you have Letty, who's just perceived, because she owns her sexuality, as being promiscuous, and that wasn't even the situation. But then you also see American culture where we kind of go off what is implied from messages from other people. He really didn't give Letty the benefit of the doubt because he went off what Tree was saying.
I got to push back on some of that though. Like, I think we really need to be specific, and we have to really address the elephants in the room and stop being vague around what people were talking about and what's creating all the tension here in the comments on Facebook. Okay, so one of the things that's happening here is, as you were saying, Omira, like about culture. But I think we're not just talking about the difference between like American culture and Korean culture. We're talking about Black American women and Asian women. You know, we're talking about Black men and Black women and our relationships with each other, which is definitely, there's definitely a statement being made about that. I think what happened on Facebook today was people made a lot of, like, we jump in with excuses about Tick. We jump in with like, everybody's all of a sudden psychologist, and we all know the contours of how this trauma affected him at this stage in his life. We don't know that. None of us, like most of us in the group, are not psychologists. We're not qualified to know like how this trauma manifests itself in this specific behavior. I don't think the writers were interested in breaking it down to that level of detail. I think the writers showed us a Tick who is the same. I think he still reads lots of books. I think he still idolizes son Uncle George. I think he's still constantly reflecting on his dad's abuse of him and responding to it through his behaviors. I think Tick is very much the same. He had trauma in the war, and he had trauma when he came back from the war. I think the show is constantly drawing parallels between the traumas of racism, the traumas of dealing with kind of like ideological monsters and then real monsters. I think the show is always troubling that and saying like, look, trauma is coming at this man from all sides at all times. The difference is there's one woman who is this and another woman who is that. And his behavior with those two women are different. And I think we cannot ignore the fact that there is a social phenomenon happening. For instance, if I were an Asian man watching, I would probably feel some kind of way about being the sidekick yet again, who is asexualized and is actually helping this Black man court this Korean woman, right? Like, there's research about that kind of thing, like about how you know, Asian men feel kind of left outside of the realm of what is considered like sexy in terms of like the way Hollywood and the media presents masculinity. Black men are allowed to be sexual and sexually desirable. White men are allowed to be sexual and sexually desirable, but Asian men are not so much. They're depicted as like robotic. They're good at math. They're geeks. They're nerds. I mean, we even had that trope in this episode, right? Yeah. So I think when we think about the Asian woman, she's also sexualized, but in a different way. She's either kind of like the trope of like the dragon lady, or she's kind of this delicate, innocent flower. And it's very close to the ways in which white women are sexualized. It's like sexualization on a pedestal. And Black women's sexuality, whether we're actively sexual or not, is seen as crude, base, low. We are able to be kind of neglected. It's not that the Asian women hadn't faced that, because obviously they thought Gia was a comfort woman, right? She had to pose as a comfort woman just to get on base that night, right? To go on her lovely date. But we can't say Tick don't know how to treat a woman well. You don't forget that because you've been through some stuff, right? He didn't forget that in the midst of a war where he's pulling people's teeth out of their heads. So why would he forget that when he got home to Letty, right? He knew how to have gentle sex because he was shown that, right? You can have 5 years of rough sex after that, but you know how to have gentle sex, especially after he discovered Letty was a virgin. That second approach should have been different, right? If he did have the feelings for her that we would like him to have, or we would like to believe he has. So I think that there is something that some Black women, not all, some Black women felt away about the difference in treatment. And I think the show is I mean, there's so much realism in the show, and I feel like that's just another aspect of the show, kind of realistically presenting that there is sometimes a difference between the ways in which Black women are treated, even by Black men, and other women are treated. And again, like for me, I'm speaking as a person, as a Black woman, but I'm also saying like there's research on that. There's a difference there in a general sense, right? We've seen Uncle George, and he's dancing with Dora, and he's tender with Dora, right? And he treats his wife. He has that morning scene with Hippolyta. It's wonderful. So we know that Black men and Black women love on each other. But Tick's running from things. Tick is an escapist. I know I'm talking a long time. Please forgive me. I've been thinking about this all day. He's a runner, right? But he runs from certain battlefields, and his blind spots get the best of him. I think he represents like the type of person, the type of man who runs from a certain type of intimacy, a certain type of connection. Gia represents the foreign. She is another way of escaping what he's running from, right? He ran all the way to Korea to get away from his dad, to get away from the familiar. Letty is a part of the familiar. Black women are part of the familiar for Black men, right? And sometimes when that trauma gets to be a lot, I think sometimes some Black men want to escape us too, like, because they don't want to see that we're on the battlefield with them, right? When it comes to this racial battle. But he can't see Letty on the battlefield with him. He doesn't want to be on the battlefield with her. Remember, she had to remind him, I'm going through this with you too. Like, you're not the only one going through these things, right? So I think that there is almost like this thing where these Black women characters are having to say, hey, bro, like, we're here too, we're struggling with you. And some brothers don't want to be in that struggle with the sisters. They would rather just escape. I think that's probably as much as is being said, and we can kind of discuss and debate about that statement, but it is true. It is a truth, right? It is a truth that happens, and it is a pattern that we see in society. Again, not for everybody, but I think the show is really about pointing out kind of broad social patterns that need to be examined closely. So that's one of them.
So you think that it's I feel like I've heard it come up in Black spaces a lot, that when it pertains to relations between Black men and Black women, sometimes we enter into an arena of playing rounds of who's had it worse.
Yeah.
When you're in that sort of arena, you can't win, and you're at an impasse. And sometimes when you are in a relationship or you're in a situation with someone that is not coming from that, you can let your guard down because they are, like you're saying, the foreign perspective. Like, you're not, we can't play who's had it worse because you're coming from a completely different thing that I don't know about. So now I feel like I can maybe let my guard down a little bit and show a different side that I would almost take for granted with someone that's, my counterpart.
Yeah. I don't want to be on the battlefield and in my relationship. Like, some people, I think, don't want to struggle together. They want to have a relationship free of the struggle.
You know what? This episode is the only episode with no Black women in it. The absence of Black women in Tick's life, we see every episode. Hip pushes him one way. Dee has a relationship another way. Letty, so we get to this episode where he is free of that bond. There's nobody giving a side eye. There's nobody saying, where you headed? Literally, this is probably going to be the only time he's going to be in a world where there's no Black woman to say. And that means anything. Our presence is incredibly powerful. Just walking into the room. Everyone knows we change the atmosphere.
Yep.
Literally. When this is sucked out of the air, sucked out of the room, what happens when we're not there? Why wouldn't he go and explore? He sits down with her and reads a book. A book. We've seen him battle with Letty over books in the library. But we've never seen him. They are inside one another's laps, reading this beautiful book about the horror of who she is. And that's a romantic moment. So I think he was just only acting in a way when you remove Black women from the equation. What happens? They explored it. Now I think stateside, as it is now, it's hard for a brother to those who disconnected, because it's sometimes a real conscious decision to disconnect,
Right.
But you're still gonna have to go out on the street and see me. You're still gonna have to purposely ignore me. You see? But in Korea, we're good. I can try something new.
Do you think that has an impact on his behavior, though, and the differences between, kind of going back to the kind of main point of tension, right? Why is it that he's kind of cozily reading a book with Gia, but he's fighting over books with Letty? What's the difference there?
Black boy joy.
Power.
Power and Black boy
it's
joy.
Power and dominance. And then I know. So I have a lot of friends and we talk about relationships. And another thing is like a lot of men feel like they're already dealing with society and the norms that are expected for them. And then when they're dealing with the women at home, it's like, damn, I can't even get a break. I'm dealing with society, but I'm also got to deal with this going on. So that's something that.
But what's the this? You got to be more specific.
So they're dealing with what's happening with society, but then dealing with the norms that we are facing as Black women when we're going out in society as well. So they're getting double burdens in regards to what is going on in society and what they're expected to do, and then what we're putting on them as women.
So you're saying, okay, so that goes back to the point that I was making, like they have to carry their burden and help us with ours, and we have to help them with theirs. But if you are not with a Black partner, then you you only have to carry yours because they don't have the same burden to carry. Is that what you're saying? I'm trying to understand. I'm just trying to be clear.
So I'm saying that in that relationship with them, I'm sorry. That is a point that has been brought up in regards to like carrying the burden, right? So when you think about men, usually when they think about settling down and starting a family, it's more so geared to finances, and with women, it's more so geared to like family and establishing that decorum of family. So a lot of the times when I'm speaking to, men and having those conversations that come into play where it's kind of like they're overwhelmed with what society is trying to bulk on them, and then in comparison to what we're bringing to the table too. And because of the power situation, they don't understand the vulnerability of sharing that as an even load. Because I still think a big piece is like that intimacy piece is established with Jihad because she establishes it. Like, I'm not, like, he was wrong in how he was dealing with Letty, but she also didn't kind of like guide him in what she wanted to, like the fourth episode and how she expected to be treated.
I don't see this being on Letty at all. I think Letty has been down for him since they were in the science club together. Letty, I don't feel like Letty was like making fun of him. Like I don't know what instructions Letty needed to give him, but I feel like I didn't see Gia give him any instructions on how to treat her either. I feel like there's a really direct contrast. Like even if we look at their first date in the makeshift movie theater, when he literally reaches over and like straightens Gia's collar on her dress, right? You know, after the big flower and everything, big cheesy smile, everything, he rips Letty's dress up in a bathroom, right? It's the exact opposite treatment based on what? Letty doesn't approach him rah rah rah, like she's not all in his face. She's not, you know what I mean?
I think
she
it's two
saves
different
the
people.
man's life. She saves the man's life their first day out. You know what I mean? Like,
I think it's so. I think me and you're definitely gonna have difference of opinions, but I think it's two different ticks. I think the first tick is because he doesn't know. He doesn't know like nothing. Like he's just coming to Gia, and he's extra vulnerable because he becomes the love interest, and he really is just like, this is all a fairy tale to him. And with Letty, it's more so like and I'm not excusing, you know, his behavior, but I'm saying like it's a completely different take because of the things that he's went through in regards to what he's experienced with the war. Like I'm intimate, the first person I'm intimate with is a monster, and she takes my soul and she's reading to me what's happening in my life. And then I come home to Letty and I'm trying to establish a relationship with you, but I'm scared to open up and be vulnerable with you and establish that intimacy, which is going to add to the emotion, because the last person that I showed that to was a monster. And they tried to basically, they created this experience where it was just an uncomfortable position. And this is what I get for me being vulnerable and showing my intimacy with this person.
I see what you're saying.
I might even throw in the bomb of familiarity breeds contempt. So if you are familiar with someone over the course of years, and then you want to start this relationship with them, I'm talking about black men and black women, just the issues that we have, that we refuse to really have a dialogue with one another. We have a dialogue at one another, you know? It's always, let me throw this bomb over here, just like you all talked about. It's like the trauma Olympics. My load is worse than yours, you know? And this continues to breed contempt. With Jiha, the slate is clean. I can create the fantasy of whatever I want. And I think that's what he did. I do believe he was another person. He's since transformed and moved on to, you know, a guy who's got, you know, a little what under his belt, you know? And so with Letty, he's approaching her from a whole different perspective. I've known you since third grade or whatever grade it was, you know, but you keep giving me guff. You don't realize I was respected in Korea. I was somebody over there, you know, I took lives. And he does talk about, you know, I did some things. I did some things, meaning I can't tell you about the type of growth I had, but I am not 2.0 that you know. I'm now 5.0, you know? And so he's got to get through that past of how they were familiar with each other, you know? And yes, he does not in any way treat her in the same way that he does Gia, because Gia is a fresh book. I can build this fantasy. She looks at films in fantasy. I look at books in fantasy. That's that connection there. But the connection with Letty is deeper. And you got to fight through that if you just want, you know, that love, happiness, and fantasy. But who wants to do all that work?
And I also think that when they were younger, Letty wasn't paying no mind. Because they remember when he comes around and she's like, who's that? And it's that vision thing. Like here he goes right in front of your face this whole time. And you probably ain't even pay him no mind. So for him, it's like, oh, you know, it's kind of like the ugly duck syndrome, where it's kind of like, oh, he blossomed them into what he is now. And now he's worthy of your attention. But here he is all in front of your face this whole time. Yeah. And you probably didn't even consider him, or he wasn't valid to you. So that's another thing that comes into play with him.
He remembers her being a track star. Remember when they were about to, he's like, basically, popular. I remember you and I know what you could do. I know you could burn rubber, you know? And so the fact that he's got things memorized about her that she probably, you know, doesn't realize he's been watching her from the sidelines. So he knows he's got work to do when it comes to Letty. And I think that's the thing that frustrates Black men and Black women in this whole mishigas of what we're trying to get together. So until we're willing to do the work, we're going to be here like, you this, me that, you know. There we go.
Well, I think that actually goes back to the whole movie watching thing and how Hollywood socializes us, right? Like, I feel like he was out there looking for his fantasy just the way that Gia was trying to find and live her fantasy through the movies as well. And none of the characters in the movie are Asian or Black. We're like living vicarious lives and designing our romantic landscapes based on white characters who are not us and don't have the burdens that we have as people of color, right? So I think there is that. But again, it goes back to my point about escapism. Like, I still see that as a form of escapism. Like, you're escaping. You want love without the burden. You want the love without the work, right? You want to live in the fantasy. And that is a source of some of our issue, I think, that we have all this history and familiarity.
I was gonna say, and both of us, Black and Asian, our ideals are formed through imperialism and colonization, right?
Right.
It's the same thing, and we are stuck fighting one another when the reality is we need to fight who brought us here, this table that just has scraps on it, you know?
Agreed.
I like it. Final thoughts. Did we miss any themes? Do we want to tackle the red flag?
Ooh. We'll put a stat about it.
We'll add a footnote in the comments about the red flag, because it's a lot.
It's a lot.
Okay, so we're gonna wrap up. Well, really quick, I just wanted to visit the use of the trolley song in the very beginning, because that sort of set the stage for all of this. This was before we knew who Gia was. We were still wondering who or what she was from the previous episode. But we're starting to get this idea. And of all the movies they could have used, they decided to use Meet Me in St. Louis and open the show with this trolley song, building this anticipation of something that Gia doesn't know, is trying to connect with, and is faking the funk to produce that for her mother, really. I mean, and what do we think about that part?
I would say that first, the movie itself is a huge musical classic, right? And it's Judy Garland. If you don't love Judy, I don't know what you're doing with your life, because she is just the epitome of what the studios built her to be, you know? And she crashes under the weight of what it is to remain as Judy Garland, right? She goes through years of a metamorphosis, right? The innocent, the perfect, you know, ingenue. And in this particular scene, Esther, which is her character, gets on this trolley. They plan a day to go out to the World's Fair, which is in St. Louis. They're building the exposition. So they're just taking the trolley out to see what's happening with the build out. And so she invites the young man next door, John Truitt, to come and join her. And she's been talking about him, like, you know what? I got this. I mean, this boy is fine, blah, blah, blah. You know, I'm just wait until you guys see him. So everybody on the trolley car is like, yeah, girl, where is he? He's late. We finally cut to him running, trying to catch the trolley, you know, to catch up with Esther. The very last stanza of the song, he comes onto the trolley and she's looking out wistfully, you know, and she realizes he comes up behind her. And, you know, it's just like, that's perfect. Nothing could be more wonderful than some man chasing a trolley to catch up with you. And you've been talking mad stuff about how great he is, how great thou art. And so Jiha is just entranced by this, not realizing that Judy Garland suffers from the worst case of lack of self-esteem, because the studios have been putting these pins on her nose to give her a certain look. They've been working on her skin. They tell her, you do not meet up to the starlet standards. You know, you've got all these other beautiful stars like Lana Turner, who actually steals a man from her. He runs off and marries Lana Turner, the guy she's dating. So she's got all this trauma, despite the fact that, you know what, her heart is singing all these wonderful songs. She is the queen of the American songbook, other than Ella Fitzgerald. And so the fact that Jiha wants to emulate this, You see her eventually like, this is the fantasy. This is what I can cling to. Her eyes, when she sits down at the end of the trolley song, her eyes, and you talked about this, Shelley, change. Mm-hmm. They get super wet, super moist, and the color starts to look like, is that the film projection, changing her eyes? What's happening? Maybe this is the first transition for her from demon feelings, and I'm sorry to keep calling her demon, but to humanity. She decides that's what I want. And the fact that her life is going to cascade down once she hits 100, same thing happens to Judy. Her life completely shatters. And in the end, of course, we hear her monologue. And her monologue is her sitting down at home, trying to remember the memories for her autobiography, which never gets published because she dies of an overdose of barbiturates. She had been taking drugs since childhood. The studio had been giving them methamphetamines to keep them awake for the schedules that they were on. So she had had 30 years of drug taking. But you couldn't see that on the screen.
So it was almost as if, just like with the little boy reading Journey to the Center of the Earth, opening with this Judy Garland was our foreshadowing of Gia's story, because she's having the same sort of dynamic with her mother and the same sort of beginning with abuse as a child and hoping to be redeemed by this man, by the anticipation of this man that's going to save her from her existence.
And it never happens.
It never happened.
Which is, hello, some fantasy reality check for all women. That prince is not necessarily coming in the way that you believe
he's gonna come.
Show up. He may be on his way. I'm not going to squelch all that hope out there. What I am going to say is he may not show up in the format you believe that he is supposed to show up in. Yeah.
Words to live by. There it is. We have given the major themes, talking points. If there was something that we missed and you wish you were a square on this screen to yell it out to the world, please let us know in the comments. Thank you so much. Like, comment, subscribe, all that wonderful stuff. And thank you for joining us. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.